welcome. I'm Reverend Jackie Fernandez, and this is DEIJB Conversations, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Justice, and Belonging. So we always want to anchor DEIJ in that belonging, which to me is, I define as radical oneness. If we are one presence, then we all belong in that presence. So let's get to it. We are anticipating, of course, World Day of Prayer is right around the corner, September 9th and 10th, um, or 10th and 11th. 9th and 10th. The opening ceremony on Wednesday evening, September 10th. If you are not local to Unity Village area, it will be live streamed and you can register for the stream. Also, there are lots of activities planned at the village on Thursday, which is the actual World Day of Prayer. And I think some of those you can also live stream as well. Michael Gott will be here from Unity of Houston. And I imagine we will be hearing him sing as well, right? We can't have Michael Gott in the room on a microphone without hearing his wonderful voice. So hopefully you'll have plans to participate in World Day of Prayer. And so with that anticipation coming up, I want us to talk about mindfulness and inclusivity as it relates to prayer. And we'll do part one today. And then in 2 weeks, we will have our reflection session. So today is recorded. I have PowerPoint and some videos for us to watch. We'll do just a little bit of discussion time today, but our next session in 2 weeks will be not recorded and we'll fully devote the time to discussion, conversation about what comes up for you. And then in September, I will pre-record because World Day of Prayer would be our second Thursday and I will be out at the village participating. So I will pre-record part two and that'll be on the USCR website, unitysouthcentral.org for you to watch. And then we'll have the discussion again on the fourth Thursday in September. All right, everybody clear about that? Then let's get started here. Let's see.
So clarify again that the Wednesday night is 9th, isn't it? And the
Yes,
Thursday night
Wednesday
is
the 9th is the opening ceremony.
and Thursday
And
is
yeah, and that's when we'll probably hear from Reverend Maggie Alderman, Kathy Beasley, Tracy Riley, all of the leadership at Silent Unity, and then Reverend Michael Gott will be there as well for that. And then they will all, of course, be participating in the Thursday activities. So inclusive prayer and meditation. We're going to talk about, a lot of times when we talk about inclusivity and prayer, we're talking about interfaith perspectives. And I want to take us beyond that to more than just interfaith. That is important. And I think in Unity, we do a really good job of that. We explicitly state that we honor all paths that lead to God or that lead to love and light. There are variations on the specific language, but we all pretty much agree that we honor all paths and faith traditions. So we're good at that. And then I like to offer this quote by Renee Roederer, a Presbyterian minister. Concepts shape language and language shapes community. So I want to get more specific about our prayer language and inclusivity beyond the interfaith perspective, but more to what's theologically, culturally inclusive and including disability culture, affirming language, and gender inclusive language. So this is going to be an opportunity both this month and next month. And we're going to welcome Lisa in here. Welcome, Lisa. And I see you brought a friend. Louise is here, so we're so grateful for that. But so we want to talk about how our language is inclusive to both gender and disability and go beyond that interfaith perspective. And leading up to World Day of Prayer, both of these sessions, that's what I was saying, will offer opportunity for us to really reflect on our own prayer language. And so I'll continue to offer an invitation to listen to recordings of yourself praying. Nobody likes to do that. I don't like to do that. I see you all kind of responding in a way I would expect you don't want to do it. But I'm going to invite you to do it. In one, get over the way your voice sounds. It sounds lovely. It's beautiful. You are the voice of God. And so invite that perspective in, but then really reflect on the language that you're using and give an honest, evaluation, and not to judge yourself, but just to notice, are you in a rut with the phrases that you use? Are you in a rut with the terms and about God, how you name the divine? Are you using God only? Are you using spirit only or universe only? Or do you flow easily between different names for the divine? Do you have like your favorite closing line? Again, not to judge, but just to consider and evaluate if that language really matches your heart and your consciousness where you are now. Have you been doing it for 20 years and it's like it's rote memory, but it feels good and alive for you? Great. But if you notice that maybe it's feeling less than alive and good for you and expressive of who you are now, then it becomes an opportunity to expand our language. So that invitation will keep coming back around and you'll have homework around that as well. So again, more than interfaith, we want to be theologically and culturally inclusive as well. And here's what I'm saying. Unity is fairly good. It's very easy to, you don't have to go very deep into unity to hear different names for the divine, universe, God, spirit, energy, divine mind. What else do you guys use? Any of you have a favorite that I haven't listed? Deva,
I use beloved presence.
beloved presence, sweet spirit, I've heard, sacred spirit,
I call
all
it
of those.
source because
Source.
it's principle.
Yes,
So,
principle is another one.
yeah.
Principle, source, energy, some of those. Yeah, we are really comfortable with using a lot of different names for God. It's a comfortable conversation in unity. And again, I'm inviting you to reflect on your language. Are you in a rut? Like, do you have that vibrancy that you once had when you stopped calling God with he, him pronouns, using only God, and you switched to universe? But maybe now you've evolved beyond that. And I don't want to, when I say evolve beyond that, I don't mean that we all should have a goal to evolve beyond any particular name. I'm just talking about our individual relationship with the divine. Your greatest evolution into naming God might be universe. So it's not about judgment about that. It's about resonance, right? It's about what is reflecting your consciousness and how connected are you actually feeling in the moment to the language that you're using, because that will light up your prayers, right? We were going to listen to 3 different videos. They're all pretty short, but throughout this session. And 2 of them, if you were part of this last year, you've seen them, but I think they are kind of timeless in nature. And you are also a different person than you were last time you watched it, if you saw it already. So we're going to do it again. And also because I think Amy Kenny, who is an author, and she wrote this book, My Body Is Not a Prayer Request. The tagline is Disability Justice in the Church. And I think it's so powerful. She is not a unity person, but she is someone who grew up in church life and has continued to go to church throughout her adult life, off and on. But she speaks very plainly about having, she uses a wheelchair, and we'll hear in the video about treatments, how she's been treated in the church environment. And I think I have witnessed and or heard stories of very similar types of interactions in the unity environment. I mean, we are a movement founded on healing and the activity of healing. And so, we also use phrases like metaphysical malpractice to really kind of name what can go sideways in our theology and how we can actually cause harm to other people. So we give you a little more information about her. She's a disabled scholar who's writing on disability, has been featured in Teen Vogue, Sojourner's Shondaland, Reader's Digest, and Does anyone still get their Reader's Digest? And HuffPost. Her award-winning book, My Body Is Not a Prayer Request, mixes humor, personal narrative, and theology to invite faith communities to rethink their unintentional ableism and to learn from the embodied wisdom of disabled people. And we talk a lot about embodied spirituality. You know, to me, that's where the fifth principle comes alive, right? We must live the truth that we know. And if we are living it, it's coming to us and through us, through our body. We want to be connected. Why else did we incarnate, right? To get all the way in our body. And so to be able to learn from the embodied wisdom of disabled people, right? I love that turn of phrase. And so I'll drop to the bottom paragraph. You can usually find her cruising on her mobility scooter, Diana, Princess of the My Scooter, named after Wonder Woman, hanging out with her cane, who is named Eileen, or in the water where she'd always rather be. So let's hear from her. And Dava, would you raise your hand or give me a thumbs up if you can hear it once I hit play, or a thumbs down?
Well, I'm a disabled woman and I grew up in and around churches, and I experienced a lot of ableism in church spaces and from fellow Christians. And a lot of times the ableism would be explicitly conflating disability with sin, or asking me directly what sin is preventing you from getting up and walking, or telling me that I don't have enough faith in order to be non-disabled. And that's not really a fun experience. 0 out of 5, would not recommend. And I also would receive a lot of unsolicited prayers and potions. So people come up to me at church and in other spaces as well and give me curatives that they've made, or suggest oils or eating kale or hitting my leg with a hammer. Somehow I'm still disabled. And also people would attempt to pray for me. And these would be unsolicited prayers that were attempting to get rid of my disabled body. So the book is a
Okay. How about that? Yeah. Anyone have anything that you want to share from that? We won't get into too much discussion today, but I do, when I'm bringing these topics forward, want to give opportunity for anything that comes up. Anyone want to speak? Deva?
The part that stood out to me at the end was unsolicited prayers. And I went to, oh my gosh, how often do I do that?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. How often do I do that? So easy, right? Because we mean well, right? And who wouldn't want a prayer?
Yeah, but you can't pray what that person needs to express in their divinity.
Yes.
You can pray
Consent,
for them to
right?
get some new shoes, but that's not what it's about, what's happening. And
Yeah. Maybe they need a coat. Right. Yeah. And it's, we always want to pray with consent, and it's such an easy, well-meaning action to take, but really great discernment there, Deva. Having permission. And I don't know, even just as a unity person and as a queer person, I've been told by my Southern Baptist, former mother-in-law, I'm praying for you. That doesn't feel good. That prayer is not received. I am not receiving that prayer, So very good. Anything else come up for you as you've taken that in? And then you've noticed I put some notes at the bottom of that video, like to translate into New Thought context. Here's some essential oil, use this. And maybe the person was just expressing some anxiety in that moment. Here, just do this. And it kind of has the unintended consequence of encouraging magical thinking, right? Superstition, really, instead of engaging in true healing activity and dynamics. Okay. So we're going to talk about removing ableist language from prayer and meditation. It's so ingrained in us. So many turns of phrase or turn of phrases. Not sure where the plural goes on that one, but so many, you know what I'm saying, are built around metaphor with the body. And we can so easily unintentionally use ableist language. And so as we become aware we gain responsibility, right? Once you know, now you're responsible. So we want to move in the direction of inclusive language, and we want to be mindful of the impact that our language has on those who are listening and or receiving. And you see right there, I offered listening, which is ableist, and I included and receiving because someone might be reading the words that you're saying with closed caption, for example. So again, you'll see right in the middle of the slide, right here in the very middle, mindfulness is greater than perfection. So we never want to be overcome with the stress of so much to track when I'm just trying to say a prayer, right? We want the mindfulness that will guide us with wisdom into a way to deliver a prayer that can most effectively impact those who are receiving the prayer, okay, in the group. So it's not about perfection. You might not even know that there's a deaf person in the room when you're praying, so you can't be held accountable to something you don't know, but you may know that there are people who are hard of hearing in the room. And so what are you going to do? Or you may know that there's someone who can't feel their feet. And when you get to the part of the meditation where you say, feel your feet on the floor, that becomes now someone is excluded from that experience. So as we consider what are the sort of maybe habitual turns of phrases that we use or imagery that we use in meditation and or prayer, we become aware, then we also become responsible to expanding and opening that language up so that more people can be invited in to receive the prayer. So the key here is to avoid perpetuating the negative stigma of disability, right? Disabled people often celebrate their expression, just like we saw with, our Amy, she's named her mobility scooter Diana, Princess of the My Scooter, and her cane is named Eileen. This is someone who is celebrating the tools that she needs to function in the world. She imagines, I heard her in another interview, I think, talking about God, God is someone who's using a gold-plated, diamond, trimmed wheelchair, So you talk about created in the image, right? We tend to default that image must be a perfect body according to structure and ability, where here's someone who has expanded their vision of God to be a reflection of themselves. God must use a wheelchair because I do. I love that. So if we're imagining God to be disabled or for God to be deaf, one of the videos we'll hear soon is by a deaf woman who is, or person, non-binary, they then pronouns Swanee, who is part of my congregation, and they are 9th generation deaf, and they celebrate it. When a baby is born in their family who is deaf, they celebrate that because their culture continues. So here are some options for removing and replacing ableist language. Close your eyes. Well, if you need to watch the interpreter or closed caption, you can't close your eyes during the meditation or the prayer. Excuse me. So I will say close your eyes, and I often add or soften your gaze. Relax. Instead of feet flat on the floor, you can say imagine yourself rooted into the earth. Sometimes I will say, I invite you to place your feet flat on the floor if that is comfortable for you. And even just that opens the language enough. You don't have to name every single possibility for every single, person in the room, but just being open enough in your language, it allows people to see themselves and to invite themselves into the partnership of that prayer or meditation. So I may have, neuropathy and I can't feel my feet no matter where they are, but I've heard you say, if it is comfortable for you, so I'm going to do now what is comfortable for me, which might be crossing my legs or, whatever, swinging my feet, if they don't even touch the floor. Listen to the sounds around you. That's very common in a guided meditation. It's, it's about a teaching of mindfulness of what's in the space, noticing what you're hearing. If there's a loud, a siren going by, we bless that. A lot. It's very common for us to incorporate the senses as a mindfulness practice. But if you are deaf or hard of hearing, you may not be able to hear the sounds around you, or they might be jumbled up and cause confusion to your brain. So we could say, notice the space around you. And that gives permission for people to notice in whatever way they can. So it might be visually, it might be auditorily, it might be tactically. Just notice the space around you. Hear or listen to the voice of God. Well, if I'm not a hearing person, I'm not hearing. I could be listening, but even that is a nuanced word. Now, if you have an ASL interpreter, which most Sundays I'm fortunate to have, it's the job of the interpreter to translate that in a way that might be receive. But I have trained myself, because I have deaf congregants, to drop, hear, or listen to the voice of God and to receive. When you receive guidance from the divine, that way I don't feel like I have to say, when you hear or receive, I can just receive. Works for everyone. And there are hearing people who don't hear the voice of God. They have a knowing, right? It comes like a download and a knowing, something in the gut. It's even for hearing people, a lot of them or us are not hearing the voice of God. So receiving guidance really opens that up. Those with ears to hear can become those willing to receive. Again, it's a very easy change to make, but if we don't know, we don't know what we don't know. We don't notice unless, we sort of hit up against, someone comes up and says, well, you used a lot of ableist language and that didn't really work for me. So as we train ourselves to just expand our language, I would invite you too, if you start doing that, to really notice how it feels in your body. Even just shifting to, notice the space around you, if you're willing to receive divine guidance. To me, it kind of evokes curiosity, right? And it invites me, if I'm invited to notice the space, for me, I'm using probably my sight and my hearing. And does it feel cool in the room? Does it, can I feel a draft? Does it feel hot? I'm tuning in to more than just listening to the sounds. So it really becomes an expansive experience for everybody. Here's some more. Stand if you are willing and able. Very common, especially for singing a song, for a time of greeting, anything like that. I often say, and I've learned this from other people, stand or raise your aura. I always say stand, as you're willing and able, or simply raise your aura. And that gives permission for anyone who maybe can stand comfortably, but is just really tired today, or they're with someone who can't stand, and it really gives them permission. They don't have to sit and think about, should I stand? Should I sit? Should I stand? It gives everyone permission to just be what feels good in the moment. I could just lift my aura, and that creates the same energetic lift as standing together in the room. So people get an opportunity to participate in that way. Turn a blind eye. Ableist language, great metaphor that most people can understand, but if you're blind, probably doesn't feel great to hear that, because it puts blindness as, equaling something that's wrong, right? As a default, or something that you're lacking. So remove from our awareness, really, what are we trying to say, right? Remove from your awareness, let it go, release the thought. That would be something else to say. Whole and healthy. We affirm wholeness as an abiding state. We affirm wholeness as an abiding state. So then we don't have to go in and explain, well, even if you are sick with the flu, or if you're having a cancer experience, you are whole. It is an abiding state. But when we say whole and healthy, then someone who is not healthy might also have a sense of feeling, I'm also not whole, because we've paired the two, whole and healthy. Out picture of perfect health. Very common. What do we say when someone has a baby? Is everyone okay? Is everyone healthy? Does the baby have 10 fingers, 10 toes? Like we immediately, with good intention, because we want life to be easy and we want to know what is the level of stress for this family. But we could ask those questions instead of, is the baby okay, for example. So those with ears to hear, those willing to receive, releasing tension. Notice any tension, and choose to release it or allow it, befriend it in harmony with the body. What if someone is there who has severe pain in their back, and so everything around that pain point is tense, right? Is working, and you've probably experienced that yourself. Notice any tension and release is not going to work for that person in the amount of time, 7-minute meditation, 4-minute meditation, and they spend the whole time trying to just do that and they've missed everything else. So we can have permission to release it or allow it, befriend it, be in harmony with it. It's part of what you're experiencing right now, and it need not interfere with your connection with your prayer. So in guided meditations, if you give a physical activity like walking through a forest or along a shore, you could say move your body along the shoreline. So that allows people to imagine themselves walking, rolling in a wheelchair, floating, flying, and really, again, it has an added benefit for everyone because it really creates expands the experience. If including the sense for mindfulness, simply add the word if or the opposite. So if you notice a scent or the absence of scent, especially like during COVID time when so many people were impacted in that way, well, they're not noticing the scent. Now they're just thinking about how they can't smell anything, but you could notice that's a noticing. Notice the absence of scent. What sounds or vibrations do you notice? So that expands. If I'm not hearing the sounds, but I'm feeling the vibrations of the HVAC system or a big truck rolling by or a train in this distance, or maybe the kids are in the next room and you can feel the jumping on the floor, the vibrations moving through. We have provided for some like extended meditation services, helium balloons or bottles of water, both of which will hold vibration. So a deaf person can hold the balloon or hold a bottle of water and feel the music vibrating through those. And so they have a sense of when the sound builds and when it relaxes, which just creates more energy connection for those folks. So now we'll talk about gender affirming language in prayer and meditation. Mother, Father, God. It's close, but it's still anchored in the gender binary. So while it is more expansive than Father God or Mother God, because it includes both, it's still for the person who is agender or transgender, they still might not feel fully included. So an easy sort of way to approach this is not a problem, but it's an opportunity, is to just kind of consistently change up the pronouns that you use for God: she, he, they, it. And as long as you're rotating through there, that sends the message that you aren't anchored into a specific gender perspective of God or of the divine. And it could be really powerful to notice when you use the she pronoun versus the he versus the they versus the it. When you want a powerful God, you might go to they, because there's like that plurality of presence. When our language for God reflects the gender spectrum, more people will recognize their own divine nature. That's the bottom line for all of this. When we can remove ableism from our language, when we remove include the gender spectrum, but remove the binary, then we're allowing more people to see themselves as divine, as the presence of the divine. Now my God wears contact lenses. It's a reflection. So there are just many ways, and it opens, creativity for us as well. Okay, so I mentioned Swanee, who attends as a member here at the church. They have been really busy on TikTok. And they've started this series that is kind of like answering questions that hearing people have about deaf people. Like one, like common question is, can deaf people drive? And they're making these really humorous videos. There's one about how deaf people flirt. And you know, they've got ice cream and they're like in such a terrible way, so comedic, trying to flirt with someone who's like me. And then a bird poops on their shoulder and they think it's the ice cream. And so they, look at, and then the person is like, it's the bird. Really great, funny stuff. This one is not as funny, but it's relevant to what we're talking about. So I am going to share, let's see if I can move this, and it is not moving for me. There we go. All right. And David, I'll ask you, it's just because I can see you on my screen. I'll ask you again to give me that thumbs up. Are you seeing the video bar of your faces across my screen or across your screen? Perfect. Okay. So you can see it. And actually this one you don't need audio because they are signing. Oop. Why is that showing? That's a question, right? Like why stay in a pain state? And why I chose that one is because I think that it's a great question to ask in our ministry. If you're in pulpit ministry, why would people come to your church if it doesn't fit, if it hurts while they're there? In other words, if they're not feeling belonging or connection. And so like really to motivate us to allow the space to be comfortable for whoever might walk in the door. Again, perfection is not the goal here, but it's just more expansiveness, more openness, and more learning and as leaders, but also for our congregation. The more we invite our congregants to wear their pronoun stickers on their name tags, for example, or to shift language if you have lay leaders or your prayer chaplains who are often inviting people into prayer and or meditation, to give them some of this, like to allow them. And then when it becomes community wide, it becomes part of the culture. So then people, as Swanee is, relaying the message, as people come in, they will feel more like the shoe fits, right? And not as much of the pain point. If someone in a wheelchair has a really hard time getting into your building, they're probably going to decide this is not a church for them, even if they love the service. So we just want to reduce the pain points. All right, this one, the Sparkle Creed. This one does have audio. Pastor Anna Helgen, Adena Community Lutheran Church. So it's ELCA is the brand of this church. But here we go.
I invite you to rise in body or spirit, and let us confess our faith today in the words of the Sparkle Creed. I believe in the non-binary God, whose pronouns are plural. I believe in Jesus Christ, their child, who wore a fabulous tunic and had 2 dads, and saw everyone as a sibling child of God. I believe in the rainbow spirit, who shatters our image of one white light and refracts it into a rainbow of gorgeous diversity. I believe in the Church of Everyday Saints, as numerous, creative, and resilient as patches on the eighth quilt, whose feet are grounded in mud and whose eyes gaze at the stars in wonder. I believe in the calling to each of us that love is love is love. So beloved, let us love. I believe, glorious God, help my unbelief. Amen.
Isn't that fabulous? Isn't that so fun? So fabulous. So here are some more examples for gender affirming language. As men and women is common, right? Ladies and gentlemen, as men and women, blah, blah, blah. As people, as individuals, as expressions of God, as expressions of the universe or the divine, so many other ways we can say, why would we even identify people in the room by gender? Like when we think about it. I think it's because at one point women weren't in the room. And so then it became habituated to, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that kind of thing. But there's really no reason to identify people by gender. So just as people. Good morning, people. Good morning, folks. Good morning, friends. Um, Divine feminine, divine masculine. This is, just divine nature. Or we could name the qualities that we actually mean when we talk about the divine feminine. What are those qualities? Are we talking about the nurturing? Are we talking about softness? Are we talking about a strength, a quiet strength? Are we talking about a bold strength? Are we talking about wisdom, creativity? What is it that we're actually qualifying as the divine feminine or the divine masculine? Let's just talk about that directly instead of, gendering the divine. It's not even necessary. It can be useful, as a tool because it's familiar, but I would offer for your consideration that it's becoming less and less useful, less and less familiar as more and more people are identifying themselves somewhere on the gender spectrum, not necessarily fully on one end or the other. So, or one, if you look at it as a circle, one side of the circle or the other. So again, it's about including more people and connecting, allowing more people to connect with you. So wherever you find yourself on or off the gender spectrum, instead of like, oh, if you're a man, or if you're, expressing more of your maleness or more of your, instead of taking a long time to try to include, or if you're trans, or if you're non-binary, or if you're agender, like wherever you find yourself on or off the gender spectrum, and then continue. Like it's a faster way to get to what you're trying to say. And again, we always want to go back to, is that even relevant, actually relevant? Or am I trying to make, some old turn of phrase fit into, or do I need to just release that turn of phrase, right? And just address what I'm actually trying to speak to. So that is the conclusion of the PowerPoint that I have for you and the wonderful resources that are available. Again, I'm going to start with that same quote, or end with that same quote that I started. Concepts shape language, and language shapes community. And that's why we do this work, because especially if you're in a church community, but even if you're not, you're probably often praying to groups or speaking to large groups, at weddings, at celebration of life services, or, community events where you might be invited to give an opening prayer. All the more reason to really allow your language to be open, expansive, inclusive, for all people, and void of ableist language to the degree that we can. So your homework, should you choose to accept this assignment, it will not be graded. You will not be judged if you don't do it, but it is an opportunity for you. Watch and or listen to a few recordings of your prayers and meditations. And so that covers, you see, watch and or listen, right? Watch if you're reading the captions, or listen if you're hearing. So watch or listen to a few recordings of your prayers and meditations. Notice opportunities to shape your language in a way that reflects you and your community. Try it out. That's your assignment. And then we will talk about how that felt for you to listen to your prayers. And again, remember, you are the voice of God, so you're not going to start by judging how your voice sounds. If you have like some kind of tick or something and you notice that, okay, that might be something that you give some attention to, but not in a judgmental way, right? In a loving, compassionate way. August 27th will be that session. And now I'm going to stop the recording. So if you're watching the recording, we have just a few minutes left, and we'll have a little bit of conversation and discussion. And I invite you, if you're watching this recording, to spend a little time journaling about what came up for you, and maybe some things you might want to try, or go ahead and hop on and do the homework assignment and join us live for the August 27th session. All right. right.